I think looking back at it now, I don't think we were aware of the challenge that awaited us. Created that mood piece in 10 days. And we were so happy, and every time we showed it to people, they said, yeah, please go ahead and make this. And then kind of almost like every time we peeled back a layer of the onion, that actually there's so much more. There's so much more we don't know.
On October 7th, 2014, British game studio Creative Assembly released Alien Isolation, a first-person survival horror game based on the popular movie franchise. A tight, claustrophobic and often exhilarating experience as players take control of Amanda Ripley as she hopes to survive being trapped on the Sevastapol space station. People are dying at the hands of a xenomorph, the very same creature that stalked Amanda's mother and franchise matriarch Ellen. Alien Isolation is an oddity in a number of ways. A AAA first-person horror game at a time where the market had not yet matured, created by a studio famous for real-time strategy. A game that relied on an established IP, but based its core design principles on that which video games had not previously explored. A game that broke many core tenets of design within the big-budget AAA sphere of the period, all in an effort to create something fresh and unique that would have a lasting impact, not just in video games, but on the expanded universe of the Alien franchise. Since then, it's a game that has captured the imagination of players around the world, courtesy of the attention to detail and reverence for its source material, combined with the nail-biting terror players feel in hiding from the game's intelligent and seemingly unstoppable adversary. I'm Tommy Thompson, this is AI in Games, and to celebrate over 10 years since its initial release, we welcome a collection of people from across the games industry to discuss the project's development and its broader impact, including several members of the original Alien Isolation development team, all in an effort to provide even more insight, to revisit the horror of Sevastapol as we explore the AI of Alien Isolation one last time. While Creative Assembly is famous for its work in real-time strategy, the studio is known for a lot more than Total War. Founded back in 1987, the studio built its reputation in work-for-hire in porting games to MS-DOS, with their first release being the port of DMA Design's Amiga title Blood Money in 1989. Throughout the 1990s, the studio had a strong relationship with Electronic Arts, publishing the DOS port of the inaugural entry of FIFA International Soccer in 1993 and Rugby World Cup 1995, with this relationship continuing up to the turn of the millennium, working on games based on Australian rules football, the ICCC Cricket World Cup, and international rugby. The birth of the Total War franchise with its inaugural title Shogun led to a bountiful number of releases in the decade that followed, with 6 main entries from 2000 to 2010 and numerous expansions to keep players entertained. Having built their own IP and identity throughout the early 2000s, this led to their acquisition by Japanese gaming giant Sega in 2005, who saw them as a means to strengthen their presence in Western gaming markets. Meanwhile, Creative Assembly had seen an opportunity to begin to branch out into new territory with Spartan Total Warrior, a spin-off of the Total War series announced at the Game Developers Conference that same year. The console team, as it is known within the studio, was built to handle the challenges of shipping Creative Assembly's first console-exclusive title across multiple platforms, with the game releasing on Nintendo GameCube, PlayStation 2 and Xbox in October of 2005. It is from both the studio's acquisition and their expansion into console development that the origins of Alien Isolation can be found. After the release of Spartan Total Warrior, the console team continued to develop their technology stack for action games, with Viking Battle for Asgard shipping to PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in 2008. And it's at this time that an opportunity presented itself.
Sega had access to the Alien license, and they also had access to the Olympics license. And I think there was kind of the discussion of putting the Creative Assembly and the development studio, getting them to make an Alien game or an Olympics game, because I think Creative Assembly are kind of known for being the Total War strategy studio, but they also made a lot of sports games and did ports of sports games.
We'd just finished a project. There was no obvious project to move on to next. I'd always been a massive fan of the first movie. I'd read the Alan Dean Foster novelization. I think before I'd watched the movie, I'd listened to the soundtrack, and if there's one poster above my bed, it was the Alien poster from the local video store. Games based in the IP previously had always focused on the James Cameron experience and being a Marine, shooting aliens, and that's really cool. That's cool. It just felt like if could make an experience where it took you back to that original haunted house in space.
We did various prototypes. There was an amazing prototype that never saw the light of day that I won't go into details of, and Alien. And I'm to be honest, I did not want to work on the Alien game. Sega approached us and said they had 2 licenses they wanted us to work on. Which would it be? And I went, I don't want to work on either of those. The alternative would have been the Olympics, and I did not want to work on that. We were all clear we didn't want to do that. But I've looked at every Alien game, and in every Alien game, the aliens are Alsatians, right? Maybe Rottweilers, but you shoot them down, they die. What happens? Well, all that blood would splatter, right? But it wouldn't eat through the walls. It wouldn't destroy where they were. If you look at what's in the original Alien film, if you shot the alien, you would imagine blood would splatter, and inevitably it would, the molecular acid would have eaten through wherever you were, right? And you play all these games, and it's just not true to what the Alien was.
Not that there haven't been great games, because there have been great games, right? But it's diminished the impact of what the first film really was saying, right? With that creature, the kind of lethality of just one of them being there, so imposing.
I think Alien games had been maybe felt like a bit of a poison chalice after some poor reception to some Alien games and some not selling so well. So I think there was maybe a bit of doubt on Sega's end about making an Alien game. But I think a small subset of people in Creative Assembly wanted to make an Alien game, but specifically make an Alien game based on the original Ridley Scott movie rather than the James Cameron movie, which every Alien game up until that point just about was based on.
So I was like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to work on that sort of game. And then Al Hope went, I think we agree, Andy, that's not what we're going to make. We're going to do something completely different. And so I was, at the moment we'd had that idea, I was completely on board with it.
But this sort of small team led by Alistair Hope, a Creative Assembly developer, sort of broke off. I think there was maybe 5 of them. And they broke off and made a proof of concept demo that was like trying to encapsulate the claustrophobia, the slow burning atmosphere, and the general vibe of the Ridley Scott film. And they made this kind of non-interactive proof of concept demo showing that what a game steeped in the aesthetic and atmosphere of that film could be like.
I think everyone else kind of moved on to help with the Total War project, which was also being developed at the studio at the time. And so there was just a handful of us, and we were given, I don't know, the legend changes year on year, how long we had. But it was something like maybe 10 days, a week, 10 days to put something together. And we had this game engine, and we bent it and twisted it into being able to create this kind of interior scene. We kind of ended up with this kind of mood piece of just the player moving through in first person, this alien style Nostromo corridor, and then at the end they're confronted by this enormous alien. And I don't know, within that 10 days it was just clear we had to make this game. We know this is it, this is the experience.
This initial demo, despite being short and largely on rails, was enough to convince Sega and license holders 20th Century Fox to greenlight the project. The team had to migrate from this prototype that conceived the vision into something more substantial, and from there the foundations of the game's design would actually come together. This meant finding people with the right skills and attitudes towards the IP and the concept, who saw the potential that the Greenlight demo represented.
So I was very fortunate to be on that initial conception project, that group of people, and then actually kind of went and did Shogun Total War, Shogun 2 Total War, and then came back to the project, I think, at one of our gates, like IL2, and then sort of joined again. And so, yeah, it was nice to sort of be there for that first thing.
So, like, I had been working in the games industry for a few years. Work on stuff like DJ Hero, Guitar Hero. Where I started with it was what I was working on at the time. Loads of people played those games and enjoyed them, but I didn't feel like I was making the kind of thing I wanted to see, right? And I think it was one of the first couple of Uncharted games came out, and I was kind of like, I want to make something like that, you know? Really wanted to go and work on something kind of like that kind of caliber. And I kind of ended up like just in a conversation with CA really early on. I guess it must have been super early in 2010, talking about the ambitions of what they wanted to do, being kind of immediately, I don't know, sort of tingled a bit with what I was feeling at the time, right? I really wanted to go on this kind of big character-driven thing. And so pretty soon after that, they brought me in, before I started, in to kind of go, okay, here's what we're working on. It was like a kick-off off-site with, it's Alien, you know, and like, how do you feel about that? I'm like, yeah.
I was invited to move from my previous company, which was Codemasters, by a friend of mine who was working at Creative Assembly, and he said, you really need to get on this thing. We haven't announced it. It's just started. I think I came in maybe 3 or 4 months after development, no more than 6. And I was there from when they sort of crystallized that idea of what Alien Isolation was going to be, and they were ramping up content designers, they were ramping up, you know, the actual team that would go ahead and make the product itself.
And I felt straight away kind of convinced, you know. I think we saw a lot of things where there was even things comparing, like, it's not going to be like a squirrel, it's going to be like this beast, you know, you're going to be terrified of it. And they had already done that first person quick demo. And so to me, I was like, straight away, this is such a cool opportunity to kind of do something super interesting with the franchise that could be really impactful. And so for me, I was like sold straight away at that point, right? I was super excited. And I think as well, just knowing that it was, even being able to be there so early with it was exciting, because I love that feeling of just going from the kind of nebulous unknown of high level idea into shaping it, you know.
And like, it's funny, like hearing Al talk about it now, and actually, yeah, despite the kind of twists and turns that happened after that initial concept, arguably the final product we made was so you can see the influence of that original one, and how having it there, I think, was probably always a good reminder to sort of be like, okay, we were initially set out for this, so how do you get back to this?
The Greenlight demo had been but a short yet succinct expression of what the game sought to be, but translating that into something that's a fully fledged playable prototype, a vertical slice of the game that shows many different systems operating at a certain level of completion, would still be a significant effort. The original demo was, by their own admission, a proof of concept hacked together in a short period of time. As such, when you start getting into the weeds of how to build it into a more complete set of mechanics, many core design decisions are still not finalized.
I mean, when I came in, you know, I think it's well established, right, that for quite some time we were making a third-person game. I joined and it was still, I think it was quite a bit below 20 people still at that point, and we were in that the corner of Total War's floor when I joined them. So we were making a vertical slice, essentially, of the early game. You know, we'd done a lot of work when we got to that point, but we were doing a much earlier third-person slice, which was really trying to just figure out, you know, everything with the character for the player, the character for the alien. You know, we didn't even actually have like a central protagonist in the game at that point. It was I think it was like a crash test dummy, you know, with a gun.
So I think around the time Isolation was being developed, I think third-person horror games and third-person action games were kind of the hotness of the moment. And so, even though, from what I understand, they always wanted Isolation to be a first-person game, I think early demos, perhaps at the urging of Sega, although I'm not sure, maybe it's just the latch onto the trends of the time, it was a third-person game, and there was really great footage unearthed by NoClip, the YouTube channel, of the game running as a third-person game, and seeing like the camera hovering over Amanda's shoulder. It's quite strange seeing it when you're so used to the first-person game, but I don't think it looks bad, but I think it has that disconnect where you feel like you're passively observing what's happening instead of being there in the moment. And I think the switch to first-person, I think it was pretty much earmarked to be a third-person game, but they did a test showing it if it was a first-person game, and it was so impactful.
So there was a lot of like primordial stuff going on at the beginning, and I was right in the middle of that. So that was a really cool time to join the project and to see it develop into what we know as Alien Isolation.
Like you said, the seed of what the game was going to become. I think you can see it in that experience. The lo-fi, sci-fi world, which we absolutely adore. It felt that the lighting, the sound, the atmospherics just felt like a place that you wanted to inhabit and explore. And then it was just absolutely critical that we got a sense of what that alien could be like. I mean, there was no gameplay there, to be clear. But just when we were thinking about what the alien was going to reveal itself and confront the viewer, the player, and I was adamant that it was going to be kind of completely in control of the frame. It's going to be big, tall, imposing. It's not something that you could even think you could run away from, or try and run around. It was just going to, once it appeared, it was going to completely dominate everything. And I think this kind of mood piece communicated, that's it. That's what we're gonna. That's our alien. Many years later, I think the seed of that idea was what actually was at the heart of the experience that we finally released, and it didn't. We went on a journey.
I was about to say, yeah. In between that, there was lots of twists and turns, but yeah, arguably, it's reflected, isn't it, in the final bit, final piece.
There were still a lot of technical and content challenges to be addressed. Critically, in order to build a game like this at the scale and complexity the demo aspired to, the team would slowly evolve, from the initial group on the early prototypes to eventually a team of around 200 across various departments. But it's not just an issue of scale and content, nor of third and first-person camera. There is also the need for modernization. After all, the innovations in fear discussed in our retrospective in 2024 was achieved courtesy of the core AI technology being gutted and rewritten in Monolith's LithTech engine. What would become Alien Isolation would take around 5 years to make, and as such, the underlying tech stack needed to adjust to the needs of the project, as well as the affordances of future hardware.
But when I got there, when I started working on it, we were really early. So, I think, Viking, I think they shipped sort of early on 360 lifetime for this. But it was still sort of at the phase of like the animation systems were like play single clips one at a time sequentially. Maybe a little bit more than that, I trivialize it, but it was not like a sort of data-driven system. It wasn't going sort of super to town with what we were starting to see in the industry. I think at that point, I mentioned Uncharted earlier, and I think like at that point in time, and even to this day, right, Naughty Dog are still stellar, right, but they were leading so much, right, and there was a lot of sort of technological comparisons, I would say, into like the level of what you could do. So when I joined, there was some basic things I was doing to just begin with, like implementing animation graphs. We didn't have those, in implementing IK systems. Doing some sort of fancier blending stuff, and then we more and more we went to town with that. We did some super cool stuff, I would say, that we all learned a lot from, and we went really in depth with kind of adding quite cool tech, specifically for the alien, for the locomotion on the alien, for all the layered stuff, the hands, the look ats, and all this kind of stuff. But to begin with, it was fundamentally like play one clip at a time, which worked at one point in the industry, right? But then, as we've got, and at that time it would become games becoming more dynamic, and knowing what we were going to do with the creature, knowing that's not sufficient, right, for delivering the characterization that we wanted to see.
The game continued development in secret for a period of just shy of 3 years, until it was revealed by the most unlikely of sources. Not IGN, not Eurogamer, not even a leaker or influencer. Rather, it was a politician. Ed Visey, then the UK's Minister of State for Culture and the Digital Economy, posted on May 12, 2011 on Twitter about his great visit to Creative Assembly, one of UK's best developers, now hiring for new blockbuster based on Alien. With the cat out of the bag, there was a lot of questions being asked of what type of game Creative Assembly's upcoming title would be. Meanwhile, at the studio, the team is trying to figure out, among many other things, one of the more critical aspects: how to build this intelligent, seemingly reactive and learning xenomorph. But it's more than just the underlying behaviour of the system, it's about how to make that creature feel authentic to the experience the designers sought. The studio had received access to Fox's archives, which gave tremendous insight to the design of many critical elements of the Alien movie, be it the sets, the costumes, the props, and of course the creature itself. But while there was a strive for authenticity, to create a game that has a sense of space evocative of the Nostromo, there were many challenges that lay ahead in adapting these concepts to something that would fit a video game in a new location within that same universe.
What's weird is you have this sort of vision of how things are made, and then you realise that actually it's not this sort of golden path of getting to something. There's all these weird diversions of sort of creative experiments and things that don't work, and like problems with how things are implemented and all these different technical limitations, and the end product is basically a series of compromises which you don't really understand if you're not in the game development circle. You sort of look at something and think, oh, they wanted to make this, and then the sort of reality is it's a series of compromises that have led to something. And Isolation obviously is a great series of compromises. It's a brilliant end product, but there's a lot of things that I find interesting.
So I've had two relationships with the AI in the game. Before I watched your videos and read interviews and sort of dug into the mechanics and the smoke and mirrors of it, it was completely the fact that it made the creature like so unpredictable, so unknowable, and so seemingly reactive and intelligent. Like, that felt like magic to me, because there's always, even the most like intelligent video game enemies, I feel like the more you play the game, the more you start to sense how the strings that have been pulled in the background and how they're functioning. Speaking as a layman who doesn't fully know about AI programming and whatnot. But then when I watched your stuff and learned about all the machinations behind how it behaves and how its intelligence grows and stuff like that, what's amazing is I still find it scary and unpredictable and unknowable and terrifying. So I think that's incredible that you can, even knowing ostensibly how it functions and how it works, playing that game, the thing is still feels intelligent and formidable and absolutely horrible to be around. And I think that's really an incredible achievement, and speaks to like how intricate and complex the virtual brain of this creature is.
Naturally, we've detailed the behaviour of the creature in our 2 case study videos on the topic in previous years, with episode 15 back in 2016 providing something of a high-level overview, plus episode 50 in 2020, in which we got to see much more of the underlying systems, courtesy of the Open Cage mod, a point of interest later in this video. But to provide a brief summary, the xenomorph's behaviour is structured into a 2-tier system. The actual avatar, the body of the alien, carries a series of sensors that allow it to see the player and non-player characters within vicinity, as well as being able to hear sound. Based on a combination of these factors, it can investigate disturbances, explore items of interest, and react to the player in a number of ways, most of which resulting in it killing you. But if it can't find you, it has to explore the world around it, hunting for any insight into your location. All of this is being governed by an AI system called a behaviour tree, a common technique used in games for dictating the flow of behaviour. You can learn more via our dedicated AI 101 video on the topic, as well as explore other videos we've made on other games that have utilised them in interesting ways, ranging from Halo 2 to Tom Clancy's The Division, Far Cry, Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, and many more. But of course, what helps reinforce all these systems is the second component, the director system that sits atop the game. This is similar to the likes of Left 4 Dead, in which the player is always being observed by the system, and it takes responsibility for moving the alien around the Sevastapol. The system observes how long it has hunted the player, and then once a threshold is reached, it falls back and it moves elsewhere. Over time, the game will then push the xenomorph back into your path and force you to deal with it. Now, this summary doesn't just distill the core of the intelligence of the system, but critically it condenses years of iteration into mere minutes of exposition. The process of figuring all of this out, of iterating on these core systems, took years of development, with a variety of challenges faced along the way. While the materials provided by Fox were massively influential in its visual design, there was still the bigger issue of keeping its presence feeling truly terrifying. In the original movie, the creature has a total screen time of around 3.5 minutes. Plus, of course, the creature was portrayed courtesy of a man in a suit. Bolaji Badejo was a graphic designer from Nigeria who was chosen for the role courtesy of his slender frame and a height of 6 foot 10 inches. His sole acting credit, Badejo was discovered by a member of the casting team in a pub in London's Soho district. His portrayal, while evocative, is built to reinforce the menace of the creature in the limited time you see it on screen. Taking this experience and the creature's design and expanding it into something that would work in a video game and would continue to prove engaging was a significant task and would impact various aspects of the design both visually and technically.
Yeah, we started from scratch. We'd been using similar AI tech that you would find in the game, but no, we had to start from scratch. We had to sit down and go, okay, what is it we want to do? Al was clear that he wanted the alien to learn. I was clear, and I know this is controversial, that the alien couldn't learn. And so we couldn't use any advanced AI techniques because the alien never encounters you. We took the whole film idea that the less you see the alien, the scarier it is. Right? The more you saw it, the less fear you got. And in our early takes, in the early animations of the alien, it just looked like a bloke in a rubber suit walking around, and it took some quite skilled animators to stop that to dehumanize it enough that it was true to the films, but not really true to the films, because in the films, especially the first film, it was a man in a suit. So it took some really skilled animators to really bring the alien to life, but still less was more. And if you're never encountering it, it can't learn. Right? And what you get is an inverse difficulty spike of, if the alien only learns when it encounters you, then the better the player, the less the alien learns, the easier it is for the better players, the harder it is for the poor players. So we were quite clear from early on that anything it learned had to be faked, which is a real shame, because part of the thrust of the alien is it's super intelligent and learns in the game, and it's all smoke and mirrors.
If we could, we'd have stuck 100% to the creature in the first movie. But like I said, we did that, and it just looked like a person, and being kind of creepy down a corridor. And that was just the wrong vibe. It's, again, we're trying to distill the feeling that you get from that first alien, that kind of unknowable creature. And I suppose switching the legs out to the more animalistic legs helps that uneasiness and otherworldliness and unknowableness. And so while it's not a one-for-one reproduction, it seemed to actually get us much further to the spirit. So yeah, really interesting.
Certainly made my life easier as well, because I found it with that foot leg structure so much easier to kind of have the sort of graceful sort of element when it was at the slower pace with that design of foot. But then also it gave good reason why it had such speed and propulsion when it needed to go fast, because it had such kind of leg extension. You had so much more to work with. So it's kind of a bit of a win-win there. There's not a lot to go from in terms of actual visual reference of movement. So it was like I started at the beginning, it was piecing different bits together, and it definitely linked in with some of that. And then kind of like taking certain bits and how that would work on the foot, maybe at a slower pace, and how it would work differently when it's fast and that sort of thing.
The first iteration of the Alien was like totally scripted, and then we were going, okay, what we need to do is capture the feeling that we're after. So we used to have a meeting, I think from quite early on, we had a meeting every single day to review where the Alien was, and that went on for literally years.
Like, we were in a really tight loop, right? Because, you know, I'm working on a bit of AI, primarily animation code and gameplay, but, you know, on the other side of my desk is the 2 AI coders, you know. To the left of me is the 5 animators on the entire game. It was so small that, like, we were just regularly iterating on it, that it kind of would come together quite rapidly. And because as well, everything of course was a focus, right? But at points, like, it felt like it wasn't a singular focus, but there were 2 kind of clear pillars the whole way through, right? Which was like the environmental stuff, you know, the quality of lighting, the way that then also is also reflected in audio, and then just the alien, right? Everything else is kind of not quite peripheral side of that, but it sometimes feels like it. So we were always kind of pulling things together. It was more like a sort of small group, always working to bring the whole thing up.
Locked in a darkened room, there'd be all the senior staff there, so you'd have the creative director, you know, you'd have Al there, you'd have the technical directors, and everybody sat in a darkened room with a great big screen playing the game. And as soon as we went, okay, we're going to try and make it systemic, we'd be sitting there, and sometimes you'd go, that was brilliant. Why? Right, something lucky happened. How can I? So I'd then leave the meeting and I'd be saying to my team, okay, the great thing that happened today was X. Right, how can we actually capture that? So we had a room with like a kind of a pool table in it, and we had some great experiences creeping around the pool table with the alien going the other way, and you're like, right, what made that a good experience? And from that grew the idea of the menace meter, right? So the idea came of having this menace meter which would measure the intangible, are you scared? And ratchet the pressure up and then ratchet the pressure off. So things like that came from just going into that, going, okay, today it was good. Why? And then other days, some days it wouldn't show up. Al would turn to me looking a little haunted, and he'd be going, okay, where was it? And some days I'd have an idea. I'd be like, yeah, it was just somewhere else. You know, it was in another room. And he'd go, okay, can we make a game where the alien is in another room? Is there a danger that a player could play through the whole game and just by a series of bad luck, the alien's always in the next room and you don't encounter it? I was like, no. He said, are you sure? Well, I suppose technically that could happen. Right, we can't have anybody having a shit experience. And then later on, he'd be like, right, I've got to show this to the Sega executives. Okay, I've got to sit in a room for 20 minutes, play the game, and I can't turn to them at the end and go, well, the alien chose not to turn up today, but it would have been scary, trust me. So from that, you know, we got the idea that we had to have a load of controls on it. We had to be able to dial up the Thea. We had to be able to dial up the intensity. We had to be able to dial it down. We had to have some idea of making the alien come from particular directions at times. But we also were very strong. We have a motion tracker, very strong. The alien never teleported. So it just came about organically. You know, from every day going, right, how can we add to this? How can we add to all of this behavior that it has to make sure that we're capturing what made those playtests great and avoiding what made them rubbish?
It's obviously a very big creature, but also it was, I think, imperative to the kind of oppressive feeling of the game as a player, having that experience that the environment did feel a certain way. So the alien kind of did need to fit into that constraint. And there was all sorts of experiments done in respects to having a kind of like standard cycle and then being able to blend in and out in and under doorways. That was kind of the early tests, and some of those did work. I remember at one stage, I think we may have even had the alien at a slightly larger scale, but it meant it kind of ended up having to be in sort of a permanent state of slightly stooped, and then that took away the ability it would have of being like I was saying, you know, the original intention was this kind of huge, kind of takes up the whole frame creature, and it kind of then reduced it to sort of being, say, kind of bent downwards. And then once we settled on that, it was looking at the metrics and then trying your best to fit into it. So it quite simply, there was a height restriction. So it meant that whether that be it standing, walking, you know, charging fast, like there was a restriction. And so there are obviously areas of the game where you then had more space. And so we did have kind of like a dynamic sort of changing when it would go in places of like smaller areas. But in terms of the process, it was mixing lots of things together. So I think I've said in lots of conversations before about this, that although there's, you know, you mentioned about the first film, and that is largely what the creature is like in the first film, there's not much kind of like from an animation reference point, because it's got the restriction of the fact it was a person in a suit, and that was perfectly, you know, it worked amazingly. And I used that reference actually early on because it was so odd. There's a clip of Balari Badejo like literally in his pants with an alien head on, walking down a corridor. You can find it on YouTube somewhere. It was kind of odd and eerie to watch anyway. So I think when thinking about that, you kind of had these constraints, but they were challenging. But I think it's sometimes important to have that because it can make you think a little bit outside the box, right? And it was always, the direction was always, right, let's keep this character upright and make it feel powerful. So then it was sort of like collecting reference from sort of fictional characters like Nosferatu, looking at dinosaurs, and then sort of mixing all other creatures, cats as well, and then looking at the anatomy of the alien itself, which has got a mixture of all sorts, and then trying to blend that all together to kind of make something that worked. And then not only that, in the different behaviors it had, so it kind of had different cycles depending on what kind of state it was in, and you know, it was a mixture of all these different things.
It was constantly like bringing the whole thing up, you know. I think because ultimately, even though like it's hard to know, especially with horror, like whether it's all kind of, I mean, I don't know if anyone else would admit it, but I certainly feel like I could admit it. It's hard to know whether it's going to work until the end, right? And so you need to keep doing all these components, and like it's really hard to know if it's going to properly work until like audio's there or until lighting's there or whatever, because, you know, is it scary in a grey box? No. Is it scary in a grey box to a reviewer? Probably not either. So, you know, there was always a constant iteration because we couldn't really tell otherwise. We definitely have moments where we could do things, or we could try out new ideas and stuff, but as much as possible, you know, I think it was always a case of like we need to improve it all. So it was a very tight loop, even just, you know, the look at stuff that I told you about, you know, where we had the independent controls. I can remember that was such a huge one. I know Stephen Holmes and I were like working back and forth on that. You know, probably at points getting heated at each other just on the sheer accuracy. You know, it needs to be like, it needs to look at you properly, otherwise it's not fair and the sensors won't kick off. And I'm like, yeah, but it needs to look good, you know, and we were constantly trying to put that together and build that up. So it had a huge dependency on what it looked like as much as how it behaved, right? They were really intimately kind of tied together.
While the core AI of the xenomorph was coming together, there was of course the rest of the game that needed to be built around it. Alien Isolation starts with the player awakening from hypersleep on the US CSS Torrens, prior to your arrival on the Sevastapol station. The boarding sequence goes awry, and once you make it on board, separated from the rest of your party, the reality of the situation becomes much clearer. The space station is in disarray. The xenomorph's arrival, combined with an android rebellion, has resulted in chaos. Factions are holding their ground, others trying to escape. All the while, the xenomorph picks off whoever stumbles across her path. The shipped game has Amanda venture to many different corners of the station, from the San Cristobal Medical Facility to Seegson Communications, the Galleria Shopping Mall, and many more. This is where the content design teams got involved, as the workload of crafting the space was broken up to different teams of artists and designers, both to create interesting locales for players to explore, and then give the xenomorph opportunities to scare the living crap out of them.
The content designer role is an interesting one because it's different in a lot of different places. 10 years ago now, at Creative Assembly, it was a kind of cross between a game designer and a level designer. It was mostly about being a level designer, but you were in charge of like the encounter spaces. You were in charge of all of the sort of realizing the story within the space that you were given. I was given a lot of the industrial spaces, the sort of backroom bits. I did the first pass over the Nistora and all the sort of engine parts for that. I guess you would call it today an encounter designer, but also a level designer. Like I was literally putting those pieces together, requesting, and then that kind of developed because we were given different areas of the station. Some people were given like residential, some people were like Catherine Woolley was given the hospital, and that's how they kind of split up the work. And that just developed by whenever one of those pieces came up, whenever you had to interact with something like that, then they would get the designer who was part of that space to work on that thing. There was a lot of back and forth for what made a space feel big but also feel claustrophobic. Like everywhere that you go along Sevastapol, even right at the beginning when you see the Torrens fly past and those shutters come down, the idea that you had these big glass space-proof windows, and it made it feel like a large space. But as soon as those shutters come down, it suddenly feels like you're trapped in this space. And it doesn't matter how big the floor space is or how tall the ceiling is, because the ceilings were like 25 feet tall, like 30 feet tall in some spaces. Huge, big, vast spaces, but you still felt contained. You still felt like you were in a tin can. And it was about removing those things that make a space feel big.
But much like the challenges with the alien itself, there's a much broader task at play in ensuring that the Sevastapol fits within the era of the original movie. While it's a separate locale and going to be more diverse and polished versus the Nostromo, the space station still needs to feel like it exists in the period around when the original movie takes place.
But it's when you go up a staircase halfway and you turn and you look at the actual floor space that you've got, and you realize that with all the consoles, with all the a little bit with the dressing, but with the consoles and the actual like practical things that need to be in this space, there isn't really a lot of room to move. And yet it's deceptive because there are lots of figure eights like designed into those spaces, and a lot of circular kind of forms within those spaces, more octagons really with the actual design of the sets. But that gives you the illusion of space while also feeling cramped.
As detailed in Andy Kelly's unofficial companion, The Perfect Organism, the game went through a significant rewrite in the final year of development, consolidating the game into the final experience that was shipped in 2014. To quote the book, "A lot was cut from Alien Isolation, but this isn't unusual for a video game. These are massive, expensive creative endeavors, involving hundreds of people and taking years to build. And it's inevitable things are going to be altered, tweaked, reevaluated, or just downright ditched. But as an Alien Isolation obsessive, the things that didn't make it into this particular video game are of special interest to me and other dedicated fans." It was enlightening hearing more about some of the original aspirations, ranging from an official VR port in development over at Sega Hardlight to other areas of the station we never got to see.
Originally, you were going to get to the marshal's office, which is obviously outside of the shopping center, and that was going to be your base, effectively. And you were going to go out and do jobs similar to the survival mode that we eventually ended up with, where you've got your little bolt hole, and you're supposed to go out and do something and then come back again. But writ large, effectively. And there were suggestions like, do we have NPCs that you can talk to? Do we have, people that you have to rescue and guide back to this place, and they will give you jobs to do? And how do we simulate that being a safe space that you create? Like, cutting through beams or locking doors or unlocking doors to get to different areas means that it's more likely the alien can come in. Or, is there sort of like a bandit raiding party that comes and attacks your settlement, your safe space? All of these ideas were running around when it was a 40-hour campaign. But then when we had to sort of like compress it down to that 10, 20-hour mark, we had so much like space effectively to maneuver. We were able to like draw a path through this big thing and give you like the greatest hits.
In an early build of the game that I had for review on PC, there was a way to like insert a command line to like unlock an experimental VR mode. So there's been VR mods since that are really well made and are really impressive. But this was a long time ago when the only VR kit we had in the PC Gamer office was a Oculus DK1, which was like that square box you strapped on your head, and it had like such a limited field of view, and the latency was terrible, and it was like, it was impressive at the time, but by modern standards a pretty poor VR experience. But even through that low res prism of that terrible old DK1, playing Alien Isolation was unpleasant to say the least. Like, I remember finding the game like harrowing enough playing on a flat screen, but I remember trying VR, and the moment it really struck me is when I saw the alien for the first time, and like I had to kind of tilt my head to look up at it. Like, you don't realize how tall it is, like, because the Creative Assembly made it taller in the game than it is in the movie, purely because you can have a 9 foot. It would have been hard for Ridley Scott to find someone 9 foot tall. He got pretty close, but in the game it's taller, which makes it a lot more intimidating. But when you're playing it in VR and you have to like look up at it, it really strikes you like what a looming, troubling presence this thing is. And I think all the kind of atmospheric stuff, like the jets of steam shooting out and lights flickering and the low ceilings and the claustrophobia of the station, all that stuff's really heightened in VR, to the point where I just didn't want to. I've got no interest in. If they did an official VR version or whatever, I don't really want to play it. It's just a bit too much, especially when your ears are covered by headphones, your eyes are covered by a visor. That's claustrophobic enough, never mind being like in a tight corridor in Sevastapol with this thing thudding towards you.
Yeah, I obviously I used to be interested in filmmaking, so when the cinematic tools for the game came out, I sort of made this introduction with some of the cut scripts I found, and I was sort of flying through the torrents and this little sort of intro sequence, and I made it as a cutscene you could download. And Gary messaged me and he was like, "This is really cool, I'm going to tell you some more information about it." And it kind of made me realise, like, obviously how much they dived into the creation of the game and the creation of the film. And he listed all of these ways that the camera was moving and how I'd done this and that, and how they could have done that at the time, and they would have done this at the time, and how they would have probably shot what I'd shot if they'd done it at the time. And I was like, oh my god, this is really cool.
If you look in the art book, there was some cut content about the actual thrusters that kept the station in orbit. They were called the gravity anchors. These big, like, venting things. And those were some of the areas that I had. But you were going to go into like 2 of those. You were going to basically go down into one of them and crawl around inside basically a jet engine, like a space station sized jet engine, and go and into one of the control rooms, one of the actual things that regulates this massive, like, spaceship sized, like, gravity anchor. And then you were going to go back up into the main station and then go back to the other control room, and you'd get 2 halves of a narrative, effectively, by people like talking to each other across those control rooms. Because it takes it would take a long time to be able to get over there, but with the sort of primitive instant messaging system, they were able to talk to each other, and it was this interesting, like, environmental storytelling bit about 2 people that would have worked really well in a film, I think, or in a TV series. But getting the sense of scale of those things and traveling all the way down to where the sort of observation rooms had to be in order to see the gravity anchors because of the way that everything fits together, it was too long for what was going to be a 10-hour game. They do come up in the actual main campaign. The whole point of, like, detonating the Anisadora it takes out the gravity anchors.
Oh yeah, because
It blows them up.
destroys your precious gravity anchors.
Yeah, exactly. But it starts the slow descent because it only destroys one set of them. And if you look at a zoomed out version, there's a set of gravity anchors underneath each tower. Mm-hmm. And originally we didn't even really think that we would need to work out how the station stays in orbit, because it's like, how do you create something like the Torrens or the Anisadora or any of the ships that exist in this universe? It's fiction. You wouldn't be able to make something like that without an inordinate amount of resources. So we didn't really even think about the gravity anchors until the narrative said, actually, we should probably go near the gravity anchors.
While the broader sentiment towards alien isolation, and indeed our own analysis videos, are focused on the creature itself, there is of course the other critical AI component of the game, and that's the working Joes, the emotionless and often terrifying androids that are holding many portions of the station hostage on orders from the central AI core, Apollo. While the Joes are far less demanding in terms of their overall AI design, there was still much to be done in putting them all together.
The Joes were fascinating. Nick, who worked on the Joes, came in a little bit later on the project, as I recall. It was certainly underway. And again, we looked at the Joes and we went, okay, what can we do that's completely different? Right? We've got the alien, and that's known, right? You can't mess with the alien. What you have to try and do is capture what's in the films. And the stories that the film ran constantly on a screen, it was just above my desk, and genuinely, most days on a loop, we did have Alien playing. That is genuinely true. I would look up, there's that scene again. No other Alien films, just that one. So I pretty much know it off by heart these days. But we'd be going, okay, we're stuck with those, right? And you're stuck with humans. Humans, you want humans to be humanish, right? So there's slight limits to that. We defined that they would be scared civilians, and so we'd got ourselves a nice tight design for what the humans would do, which is just hunker down, try to be quiet, and then do something stupid like shoot a gun, which would let the alien attack them and buy you some time to get away. But the Joes were an opportunity to go down a different route entirely.
The working Joes are like, some of the encounters with them, I think particularly Seeks and Communications, fairly early in the game, your first real moment where you're put in a tight space with a bunch of working Joes, like, is so effective, and one of my favorite levels in the game, even though it doesn't feature the alien at all, or a little bit towards the end. But I think that the power of the Joes is, like, from a gameplay perspective, it adds that friction of, like, if you were dealing with the alien for the whole game, it would, it might feel a little bit not necessarily one note, but you might get a little bit comfortable with it, whereas it throws the Joes in, and the incredible thing about them is that they're slower and stupider than the alien by quite some degree, but they're still really formidable and horrifying, because the way that I think it was so clever of them not to have them like run after you. They just walk towards you. Like, they're so confident in their ability to like pop your head like a watermelon that they just stroll towards you with those beady eyes, and it's so impactful. Like, and when they grab you as well, there's that real visceral feeling of like, I'm screwed, because they can, like, you see one in a story moment leading up to that level where one grabs a guy's head and like kills him effortlessly and then just wanders off like it was nothing. So that feeling of like being grabbed by one, you really feel the power of them.
There's the fiction as well, that like Seegson's like kind of pretty crap compared to Weyland Yutani, right? They're kind of like, you want to work a Joe? You're like, no.
To go, right, different company making a different product, let's have it not as good, right? Let's instead of going, it's just another human but a superhuman, let's make it much more dumb, and in making it dumb, let's make it have that it's almost Doctor Who villain, or those really basic vibes. I was always inspired by films, not games, making this, so most of my reference points would always be TV and films, not games. But I'd be going, you want dumb zombies, not You know, that's the kind of idea that you have for the working Joe. Let's take that idea and see how we can play with that.
That whole working Joe thing, we just really leaned into it after accidentally doing it.
You know, they're shit. No? Have you seen them? Look, they're made of rubber.
The working Joes were a series of beautiful accidents. We needed a head, so we took a head scan from somebody, and it just worked because without any hair, it just looked like this weird rubber mask on top of something. We didn't need to animate it, so it was just in this one stock, like flat, like deadpan expression. The colored eyes, they're famously, it was a mistake in one of the builds that inverted the eyes so that they weren't lit properly. So they looked like they were shining out of this dead face. And then people were just like, that's brilliant, let's do that. And then we didn't have time really to lavish attention on like the human AI or the Android AI, but you lean into it. And of course, the AI feel janky when you're dealing with a working Joe. They're robots, and they're poorly designed. They're really strong. They're really like powerfully built because they're made of like solid steel. There's no carbon fiber. There's no like synth flesh or synth blood that's coursing through them any more than is necessary.
Yeah, I think that like they made use of quite a lot of the stuff, but the decision we had like collectively was for them to be far simpler characters in the sense of like, like the fatigue you're going to be confronted with when you're. I think to deal with the alien the rest of the game, like your brain is engaging in a way that you don't really have to engage with like shooter AI necessarily. It's way more complicated than like the typical tricks we do where we fall back on the kind of rock, paper, scissors, combination of balance and stuff like this, or how you do tactical shooters or whatever. You're not engaging in the same way. It's I don't know, it's 3D chess kind of thing. And so I think that naturally, like the kind of result is that the Joes needed to be simpler, but they needed to still be lethal.
And I guess like on a thematic level, it's like such a perfect way of illustrating the idea that the Seegson Corporation is like the budget version of Weyland-Yutani. Like we know that Weyland-Yutani makes incredible lifelike androids that are indistinguishable from real human beings, and then you see the Seegson version of the heights they've managed to reach with their android tech, and it's like this rubbery headed, that just looks like an appliance rather than a person. So I think that really kind of illustrates the gulf in technology and success between Weyland and Seegson. And it is good to, I think, not much alien media shows other companies, the ones that like Weyland-Yutani goes up against, because they've got such a monopoly on everything in the universe.
I think the sense is like, well, slow them down, can explain it away by the Seegson being the kind of the crapper company, and then, but they're relentless. They're just not going to stop once they've latched on the, one thing on their mind of just bludgeoning you once you've got it in the way. 3
or 4 of them, terrifying. Absolutely fucking terrifying to go up against like 3 or 4 of them. Even if one was like okay, they got this android, I have to walk backwards, I have to shoot him in the head 6 times and then he goes down. But the fact that they were bullet sponges, the fact that they just were completely relentless, and they were the epitome of Uncanny Valley. This idea that they should not look like that, they should not be like that, and that's scary. That's terrifying.
But I think that they are just, for me, they're as fun to sneak around and deal with, and as scary at points as the alien, which is impressive considering they're just like blank-faced, human-shaped shop mannequins.
As any developer will tell you, the last 10% of any game takes around 90% of the development time. As content was streamlined and scripts were rewritten, there was still much to be done in building the finished content of the xenomorph. It's part of what makes the creature so enduring for players, in that it holds up as a primary antagonist that keeps you on your toes throughout Alien Isolation's 15 to 20 hour playtime. As I heard throughout these interviews, a lot of it came from the studio understanding how critical it was to get this right, and all the little details that helped enrich that overall delivery.
The number one kind of goal was believability. Like you had to the player had to believe what was happening on screen, because I think it's a game about making choices under pressure, and so the players having to use their instincts. They don't have time to think to, it's really instinctual, kind of fight or flight type behavior, and so the alien needs to always be believable, which means that it needs to be unpredictable.
I mean, Steve Holmes, the guy who's looking after the behavior tree, he's the king of edge cases. So you'd say, right, we need to do this, and I need the alien to do that. And we were always looking at it, going, okay, in the light of what we have, how can we work with that? You're never going, let's have a new system. You're always going, in the light of what we have, how can we make those things deliver the new thing? What do we need to add, if we need to add? But better, what can we not add and still capture it? So that's always in your head. But Steve is the absolute king of edge cases. So he'd sit there and he'd go, right, I've got a couple of edge cases. And he hated edge cases. He'd always be like, that's not going to work because there are too many edge cases. And then he'd list the whole lot. And you'd be like, okay, well, let's think through those edge cases. Let's see what we can capture. Sometimes you have to live with the edge cases. Sometimes you have to script stuff. So obviously working with the behavior tree, we've got script running as well, driving the alien. So you've got script pushing the behavior tree into particular directions. You're going, okay, when we're hiding in the dreaded closets, what do we do? Right, well, then we'll put the alien into a brand new set of behaviors. Will we? No, we don't want to do that. Let's tweak, let's pull in the controls of what we already have. So you'd have script driving the alien. The script would say to the alien, start to search nearby, enable the search behavior, but you've already got a search behavior, so you don't necessarily need a brand new set of search behaviors. Just say to it, start searching, and then it would start searching around the area of the locker. We had various search algorithms for various scenarios to make the alien behave differently depending on how you triggered it. And then we realized you're never going to get away if people hide in these. And this happened, people would say, well, I spent 20 minutes hiding in that locker, I didn't know what to do next. But actually, right, if you play the game, what happens is you spend some time in the locker, the alien rummages around for a bit, and then the script suddenly says, okay, time's up, go. And the alien would then, you'd hear it clatter noisily into so-called backstage, right, which is up in the vents. So we'd send the alien backstage, and he would definitely spend something like between 30 seconds and 2 minutes definitely not going to attack you unless you made lots of noise. So actually going into a hiding closet and being patient definitely gave you some time to make progress through the game, and that was scripted.
Yeah, you wanted to have kind of a level of telegraphing, right? I think it's important, the player needs to understand something, but there was also, I think, a power in creating that creature and the ambiguity of the certain movements, and there was, so one of the biggest things was working at what it not feeling like it's doing the same thing all the time. So like the classic kind of like game cycle, and we developed a whole technology based around trying to achieve that in respects to layering of animations, but the mixture of different locomotion animations as well, all in one kind of homogeneous set. Tobias, who you've already spoken to, was so key to that, and it was all to try and, I guess, kind of make it not feel like a game character. That classic, like, I can see the path it's going, I can see where it's going, I can pick up the pattern, although you now say, people can see it a little bit, but it was to try and break that. So it was lots and lots of layers of small details and subtleties to try and make it feel more intelligent and more real, because we all don't walk in straight lines and do the same cycle every time, right? So it was thinking on that level. It doesn't sound particularly profound when you say it now, but it was trying to break that kind of characteristic of game cycles.
We pushed it in a way where we tried to in some ways use as little as we could to create a great deal of variety. And like the animation team was great, right? With this, I had so much fun collaborating on them with these different bits and pieces. Essentially, we produced these like 3D locomotion sets that we could blend, because the alien could strafe, right? And the alien could also do its quadrupedal movement. It had full control over angular and linear velocities. It was really agile. So there's a lot of detail in that, loads of different gates. So you had the walking, the running, sprinting to be able to cater for. Then on top of that, we would then be able to throw in like upper body controls, so just like some degree of movement on top, you know, for whatever reasons. We didn't necessarily like fake stuff like breathing, because it's hard to assume what's correct biomechanically for that creature. But there's those kind of things that could be added in. There were also then hands separated out. This sounds like it's like an inspired decision to try and be clever, but the hands were split out in some cases because we had to ship on PS3 and 360 at the time, and we were running out of memory.
And just going back to when you were saying about the process, like one thing that was, I think, quite important early on was, and this was to do with sort of making it feel more real, moving around the world it was in, the environment it was in, was doing kind of very rough sort of pacing exercises. So rather than just the classic, oh, you've got a speed, it goes from A to B, it was like, right, yeah, but when it approaches this area, there's a slowing down. And that slowing down tells the player either it's curious about what's going on, like or it will just make the player stop and go, what's happening? I didn't expect that to happen. Then there'd be moments of speeding up, like that sort of thing, right? Just layering in those kind of levels. So yeah, there was kind of like rough videos made at the beginning to sort of guide that, to try and make that happen in the game, but they were just kind of created as previs originally.
So most survival horror back then certainly was very much scripted and choreographed and tightly choreographed, and 100 people play the same bit of the game, the same event will occur, the zombie will crash through the window or whatever. We really didn't want that. If we were gonna deliver on that Alien experience, we couldn't do that. We wanted the player to always be second guessing what was going to happen next. And so realizing we had to have these systems where, in the end, we're creating this play space where the player will start at one end and we ask them to get through to the other end. But actually, what happens in between is really down to the player's actions, their choices, their effect on the world, the systems, the AI systems, the each entity's senses, and then just the chain reactions of events that can occur. And
the guy who actually set most of those encounters up would end up being Steve Holmes, because he was the absolute master of all the controls. You'd have a section of level after we'd made sure, diligence that the nav mesh worked and everything was correct, and they'd be saying it doesn't play like I want. Steve would go and tweak the controls until he was comfortable with the way it was balanced. So he was involved in absolutely everything.
For the Alien, I mean, Simon's amazing, and what he did was just crazy. It was awesome to work with him on this stuff as well, because I think we both just felt like we kind of got it, and the stuff he was creating was ace. The kind of opportunity I had to just, muck around with kind of crazy tech to get it in there. But Simon was the Alien, basically. To me, it still is, right? Because this amazing thing that used to happen, I think, regularly between us. There was this is really long-winded, you've got to bear with me, right? But there's a bunch of us there. We used to go skateboarding at lunch, right? And then we'd go back and need to have a shower. And so when we were on our own floor and we'd moved separate from Total War, you'd kind of come in, go to the back, and I used to sit with the rest of the AI gameplay guys and the animators. You come in, you go to the back, and go down a stairwell, and there's a shower down there, right? And so often, I would turn up and go down that stairwell for the shower, and Simon would be down there, just walking around. I remember the first time I was like, what? What's going on, man? They kind of have you lost your mind? But he was going down there, and he was playing this stuff out, and it's kind of amazing, because it's definitely every game I've worked on, when you're working on all sorts of different things, when you're in the studio, you're running around being yeah, the guy's gonna do this coming out of cover, or it's gonna melee like this. But I've never seen anybody I mean, okay, since then I learned from Simon that I could pretend to be a horse, right? But I've never seen anyone do that, and it was the commitment to it was amazing. So he was acting it out. So a lot of that's I think was pretty much hand keyed all the way through, but Simon had meticulously acted it out
That is wild. I mean, hopefully we can get Simon in to corroborate that.
Several months later.
I need to ask Simon this. Can you corroborate the story that Tobias told me about? He apparently said that he went into the changing rooms on that side of the office near where the alien team was based and found you like performing xenomorph actions in the room. As you were saying, like trying to figure out the animations, as it were.
I don't know about the changing room part, but I used to, because of where we sat, there was like a stairwell at the side, and no one ever went down to the ground floor because it was unused at the time. So I used to sit down, or I used to go down there with the reference camera and just film out things. And this was not me sort of like, method acting the alien. It was more, I mean, it's not uncommon for an animator to act out animations, but yeah, I guess to corroborate his story without it getting sort of like more advanced over the years. But no, it was just purely to, I guess, act out the timing and the beats, because I was always trying to reference back to what I felt made it feel the way it did in the film, and then looking at the reference points was the eeriness and the oddness of it, and then trying to make sure that was in the animations. And a lot of that was to do with the pacing and the little kind of movements. And so yeah, I would act things out just to try and put the beats into the animation, because the animation was all keyframed, so it's all from scratch. So yeah, it's not me doing it in a mocap suit or anything like that. It's it's from, you just start with the T-pose and off you go. So it's about kind of standard animation stuff, getting the kind of the key beats in there. But with the alien, yeah, doing that would help me kind of go, okay, slow down, like don't rush that certain animation, or at least then have an understanding of where things should be quicker. Because what we always wanted was that it had, like Al said, it's so believable, but it also needed to react in a certain way when the gameplay needed to do so.
It's just been like, oh god, like, do you need help? Are you okay? Can I get you a cup of tea? No, I mean, I love it. Like, in a sense, it was just hilarious in a way to see, but I love the level of commitment. I mean, to me, that's like one of those ones as well. You go and look at that and go like, okay, Simon acted out being the alien. That's like a great example of how committed people were to the sort of vision of what they were trying to make with it.
Some areas, the designers took the controls and they did it themselves. And I think there's one or two places in the game you can see they maybe pulled the controls in too tightly. And with hindsight, we should have relaxed a bit in some of the areas and given you a little bit more breathing room. You can sort of see there's a few places where the designers were really, really keen to ensure that a really big encounter definitely happens in this room, which is fine, but that's and necessary for narrative, but it means that sometimes you're pulling the difficulty level up maybe quite hard at that point to get that specific experience. Because the idea of a systemic alien is you don't have specific experiences, right? Everybody has something different happen. Everybody plays it, and an area that's hard for one person isn't so hard for somebody else. But you've got to be sure that overall the balance is right.
And I think, that was really magical, realizing that means that no two playthroughs will be the same, because people make different decisions and the entities will respond in different ways. So yeah, it was a really monumental, extraordinary challenge that probably we didn't realize the scale of. And as you said, Tobias, well, the whole team, they did an incredible job of doing some really quite cutting edge tech at the time to help us have these dynamic real-time blended animations, which were quite original back then.
We had one guy whose job was entirely looking after the nav mesh, Ben. He was tweaking and tuning Recast to do different things for us. So the alien, to be honest, by the time you've set Recast up and you have things like the erosion zones next to walls to make sure that the alien, when it stays on the nav mesh, is not clipping into walls because the nav mesh is eroded away from those walls. By the time we'd set those up correctly, as I recall, the basic idea of the alien being on the nav mesh was fine. The path following by Tobias, that was pretty advanced. He, for its time, he'd got some good stuff in there to make sure the alien followed lovely sinuous courses as it moved around the level and not taking any sharp corners, because obviously at that point, well, it had to take sharp corners at times, but it doesn't look as good as when it's sinuously moving around the level. The kills, though, the animators came to me and said, we've got these kills, and one of them ran at the player from something like 6 or 7 meters away, knocked the player over, and then ran 4 or 5 meters in the other direction, and then turned round and hit you again. And I was like, we're never going to see that. How am I supposed to make that work? So what it would do is, when the alien was going to attack, it would we nowadays you would extract the root motion, right? But what we did then was we simplified the root motion by hand to be represented as just a sequence of vectors, and then as the alien was coming in, I would kind of go, let's try and use the biggest, flashiest, most complicated kill that we can, because they almost never fit. So let's have a crack at that, and I would just send vectors through the nav mesh. And if the nav mesh said it fitted, then that's the one we'd use. Right, and you go down in terms of flashiness until eventually you get the one where the alien just runs up and chomps your head because it needed no space whatsoever, or sticks its tail through your sternum and out the back. Those were 2 that were put together as the kill of last resort, because there was no space for the alien to show off how clever it was.
There was a lot of time spent on making the aliens AI like really, really good, as you know. I think they spent 3 months working on the way that the tail moved and the way that the tail detection worked, so that you couldn't just like go behind the alien and step on its tail and it wouldn't notice.
So we were really keen to make sure that the alien never cheated. And I know we've talked before, you and I, about the kind of what I referred to as the macro and the micro behaviors. We had the idea of having a game director, which didn't really happen. It all ended up in the same behavior tree. But conceptually, we had this idea that the alien must never cheat. So the macro idea could tell the alien where to go and what to do, pull it away from the player, push it into the player, that sort of thing. But micro would go, okay, I can see the player, and it would use raycasts, and we'd have view cones and all of those things to make sure that the alien was genuinely seeing you and that there was no trickery involved at all. And then we discovered you could walk right behind the alien, like right behind him, and just follow the alien through the level, and it would never know you were there. And that would mean literally you were standing on its tail, which was obviously, the tail was an IK solution of just link bones IKing and contacting with the environment. So we had to give it eyes in the back of its head. So it had a very, very, very narrow view cone with a very, very short range on it, so that if you approached the back of the alien, and we weren't as accurate as going, actually you've touched the tail, but it did have eyes in the back of the head purely to stop you being able to stand on its tail, because it looked ridiculous if that happened. So we were super keen to make sure that everything the alien did was realistic, but we never had a touch sense. So we had to fake the touch sense, which, in an ideal world would have been there, but you go, well, what are the chances of you touching the front of the alien? 0. And so touch sense was faked with a very short range. If memory serves, it would have been 2.5 meters probably view cone at the back to allow it to see you. I think there was also probably a small 360-degree view cone that would have been even smaller to stop you approaching kind of the shoulders and things, to give it a sense that if you were close enough to touch it, then its view cone would pick you up.
I was back in secondary school when Alien Isolation came out, and I was big into sort of films and TV shows and stuff at the time. And Alien was my favourite film, and I wasn't really a big gamer, but yeah, I saw the gameplay for Alien Isolation, and I was like, I've never realised that something game-related could be so sort of authentic to a movie, and everything they were showing, I was just like, this looks incredible. So I got it for my Xbox 360 at the time, and I was playing through it, and I played through everything, and I loved it. And then I was talking to my friends at school, and they were like, if you get the game on PC, you can sort of pull the files apart and tweak things and change things. And so I downloaded Steam and made a Steam account, and that was how I sort of started poking about in the files.
After the game's release in 2014, it developed a strong and ardent fan base. The critical reception at the time was mixed, contrasting between frustrations with pacing and difficulty and others that felt it achieved its goals in becoming a terrifying yet loving tribute to the Ridley Scott movie. Looking back now, it's interesting how these reviews continue to affect my work to this day, with the glowing review by PC Gamer written by none other than Andy Kelly. Meanwhile, Ryan McCaffrey's infamous 5.9 review for IGN has haunted the comments section of my YouTube channel for many years. Regardless, fans of the franchise and those of the survival horror genre descended upon the game with much enthusiasm. It's what has led to my videos on the subject maintaining their appeal. And it was important that we took a moment to chat with the other gentleman whose work has helped maintain that passion. Matt Filer is the author of the Open Cage mod, a tool that allows you to peek a little inside the inner workings of Alien Isolation. And critically, it's how I made my second video on the topic back in 2020, where we take a deeper look at the AI's behaviour.
It was great at uni because it was actually like we were learning about things in class, and then I was going home and being like, oh well, that's why that exists and that's why this is done this way, and like they both sort of fed into each other. Like I think my work at uni was probably better because of modding the game, and then the modding of the game was then better because of the stuff I was learning at uni. It was this weird sort of like cycle of like sort of trial and error of like not understanding why things work and then understanding, and then yeah, it was a really good sort of learning experience. And yeah, like I say, I was just sort of fiddling about with the XML files, and then I came across the behavior trees, which were all XML files, but obviously they were just these sort of really complex like nest of just things that didn't really make much sense. And then I realized that it was this open source tool that they'd used to build the behavior trees, and you could make plugins for the open source tool. So that was when I made the plugin for loading in the behavior trees, and I was like, oh, this is like great, like you can make nice editors and things to sort of represent all of the way these things work. And then that sort of led into building the script editor, which is not an open source thing. That's something that I've built completely from scratch. So it's this node-based editor where you can load up the game's levels and open up all the composites, they're called, the scripts, and change nodes and script sequences and all this sort of stuff, which has been a real sort of tricky thing, because obviously it's not just making a plugin for a tool, it's making the entire tool, which has been a really good sort of not only UX but just figuring out how to reverse engineer things and make sure they work. And like you get one little binary number wrong and then the entire game just crashes and you don't know why because you've got no debugging tools, and it's like it's a real sort of interesting one to play about with. It kind of feels like if people need to ask questions about the game now, they come to me rather than going to the developers, which is an interesting one, because like you go to the developers and like, this was 10 years ago, I can't remember, and obviously I'm still poking about in things, which is like a weird sort of thing. It feels like I'm sort of commandeering their efforts a bit, but obviously not the intention.
OpenCage continues to be updated to this day, with small but meaningful iterations on the underlying tools to let PC players take their time exploring more of the game. It's a real labour of love, and one for which I'm grateful. After all, how else would I be able to film these long camera pans through the many areas of the Sevastapol?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's been so many people I've spoken to over the years from Creative Assembly, and they've all been lovely. And yeah, like there was one time where I was chatting to someone high up at Creative Assembly, and they were like, come in for an interview, like we want to have you join us. And it didn't end up working out because of COVID, but yeah, I think that was a real sort of oh my god moment, because obviously working on the tools for however long I'd been working on them at that point, like 6 years, and then to get an email being like, we want to interview you for a job, I was like, because I was still at uni at the time, so I was like, this is like incredible. That was just after I'd done, I think I'd made a mod to put multiple aliens in called it Aliens Isolation, and yeah, and it blew up, and I never ended up releasing the mod, but the video got so popular and it covered like by loads of gaming outlets, and I think that was how they found out about it. And that was a really cool email to get. I was quite emotional reading that one. Yeah, at the moment I'm working on the script editor still. I'm changing the UI about, because Creative Assembly had a toolkit called Gauge, which is what was used to script the game, so it's Creative Assembly Game Editor. And yeah, OpenCage is obviously this project to try and get towards something resembling that, but the way they did all their scripting was they had this node-based system, so you would have nodes that you link together like Blueprint, and that would flow the logic and make sort of how things happen in the level. And yeah, I'm trying to rebuild that at the moment, but all of the sort of positions and things for nodes didn't compile into the game. So even though I've got all of the logical flows, the actual UI to rejoin that back together doesn't like sort of exist, if you get what I mean. So like I've had to go through and manually reposition all the nodes, and after making the tool I've had to then go through and essentially use the tool to then create all of these graphs again so that people can sort of navigate the scripts, and that's something that's ongoing at the moment, and it's probably going to take quite some time. So there's sort of two systems in the game, which is like all of the instance stuff, which is what was used seemingly back in the Viking stuff, and then all of the new scripting stuff, which is kind of similar to Blueprint, where you have like prefabs and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, trying to sort of piece those two things together is the biggest challenge at the moment, because there's like, it's essentially two different game systems that all produce the same thing, and you have to make sure that you write both of them correctly, and there's like, it's just this horrible mess of things to try and sort of comprehend and get to join up. So that's the next big challenge. We'll get there one day. So the main thing for me that I find amazing about it is the fact that I've been playing it for 10 years now, and then I still play it, and I can walk around a corner and see the alien, and I'm terrified, because it's just this not understanding. Like, as many of the systems I now understand, like there's still this sort of fear of the unknown, of like encountering the alien and being like, what the hell is it going to do next? It's this terrifying beast that even after all this time I still haven't really mastered, which I think is incredible.
It's still a beautiful game, right? I mean, I think, like, you know, so much of it you look at and go, the industry has like done so many cool things since general games technology. Hardware's improved so much, right? But it's still, to me, I mean, there's so many different ways where it stands out, but like, it's still a beautiful game. Like, I think like the whole light bound stuff is just phenomenal. You know, it was critical to everything, you know, for selling that kind of dark horror and stuff, and it, you know, impacted audio and everything. But like, it still gets me that it was.
It has been, you know, this is a 10-year-old video game, which in terms of gaming is like, you know, a lifetime in a lot of cases. Technology and everything has moved on so much since then, but it really speaks to like the sheer quality of Alien Isolation. It is, I don't think it has aged at all. It feels pretty timeless to me, because I think even the way they've done the art, it's like, if you look at it up close, like it's, the textures and stuff are all pretty minimal, and like, it's quite a stylized looking game, but I think the sort of materials and the lighting and stuff have given it I think it's just good art direction. It's that thing about art direction is forever, you know, and extreme graphical fidelity will always at one point age. So I think there's something about the look of and the art design in the game that really makes it timeless. It still feels like a modern game to me, like in so many ways. Like, I think, I mean, especially with the AI and just the sort of the way it's designed and the systemic stuff, it just feels like it didn't feel like a relic of another time. It's like it feels like a singular moment in games to me. Like I said in the book, like I hold it up there with Half-Life 2 and, you know, BioShock and all these other, you know, legendary games that have come to define a system or an era or whatever. To me, Alien Isolation is up on the pedestal with all those great Super Mario 64, everything. Like, I know some people might not agree with that, but like, I think it has that quality of like, it's a landmark video game. It just didn't, you know, sell as many copies as some other landmark video games and isn't as widely talked about or played. But I mean, the recent interest in it because of Romulus and its 10-year anniversary is like really heartening, because people are playing it and going, well, hell, you know, you're right, this game's amazing. So long may it, you know, continue being played and not fade into obscurity. I don't think it ever will, because it's just, people will play it in 10 years and it will still be an incredible experience. There's not that many games you can say that about.
Sitting here now in 2025, there's no argument that the game has endured. Over time, it has cemented its status not just as a horror game that continues to feel relevant, but also as one of the high watermarks of the Alien franchise. Many a top 10 list on the best games based on the IP will show it fighting off both classic contenders, such as Aliens vs Predator 2 by Monolith Productions, or more recent fare, such as Aliens Dark Descent by Tindalos Interactive. And of course, I can personally attest to the game's continued popularity, as my videos detailing the AI of the xenomorph routinely appear in the top 10 most watched episodes on this channel, despite the last release being back in 2020. But after all this time, perhaps the biggest impact the game has had is within the Alien franchise itself. The Seegson Corporation, the creators of the Working Joes, are now considered canon within the broader Alien universe, and references are made in a variety of extended universe projects, be it the original novels such as Inferno's Fall by Philippa Ballantine and Clara Carija, to the inclusion of seasoned synthetics in games like Aliens Fireteam Elite and Dark Descent. Zula Hendricks, a colonial marine and close friend of Amanda's, mentioned during flashback sequences of the game's novelization by Keith DeCandido, subsequently appears in Aliens Defiance and Aliens Resistance comics, published by Dark Horse in 2016 and 2019 respectively, leading to her own video game debut as the protagonist of the 2024 VR title Alien Rogue Incursion by Survios. But perhaps the most substantial impact is hiding in plain sight with the release of Alien Romulus, the latest entry to hit the silver screen. Directed by renowned horror director Fede Alvarez, he spoke of how the game lent itself to his work and drove his own inspiration.
It was kind of what made me see that Alien could truly be terrifying done well.
Mm-hmm.
But I played that a few years after it came out, so it was probably around when I was finishing Don't Breathe, or Don't Breathe was coming out, or I was waiting for Don't Breathe to come out, that I was playing the game, and that's why at the time I was like, if I could do anything, I would love to do Alien and kind of scare the audience again with that creature in those environments. But I was playing that and I realized how terrified Alien can be if you take it back to that tone.
And here is perhaps the game's biggest impact, in that it cements the world design of Isolation into cinematic canon, with the emergency phones, the interactables used as save points in the game, appearing as Easter eggs throughout the movie.
I mean, I think the timing of it was great, right? And when Romulus came out, Andy's books coming out at the same time, you know, obviously 10 years about to hit. For me, it was really crazy. I went to see it with my partner in the cinema, and I was just a little bit like, oh wow, you know, in the sense that, you know, when we started out going, we're going to be, well, we're going to be authentic to the film, right? So the film has a massive influence, Alien, that is, has a massive influence on, I don't know, stylistically, thematically, everything we did, right? But then the little touches that we added in, being like kind of reflected, I still kind of think like, I can't believe the save points are in there. Like, you know, just in the sense, I mean, I've got to be honest, like, I mean, you know, it's quite a long time ago, right? So I was a little bit grumpier and younger, and when we first did those, I was kind of like, made the game so hard, and kind of got behind it, right? But, you know, it's so funny that, like, what does time do? You sit there watching, like, oh, we did that, you know, and you felt this weird full circle kind of moment of just being like, wow, you know, what, do we have to make another one, you know, to reflect this?
I think you got it at some point, but like, you know, it's permanently in the Alien mythos now. Like, that is wild. Yeah. Like, the first time I saw one of them in the movie, I was just like, oh shit, they've actually, like, you have defined. I mean, it's already like Isolation is part of the canon, I believe, but to see it in the movies as well, I thought that was really awesome.
It's weird, isn't it? I've been on lots of games that have done well as well, right? But you sort of, you know, we've grown as an industry that we no longer feel internally like we need that validation from cinema and stuff as like another form of entertainment. We're fairly confident that, like, games are big. People care about games, you know. They're just as important culturally, and as a form of entertainment. But it's still hard to resist the thing of, like, being like, oh yeah, but we're in a film, you know, and the kind of the magical. Oh yes, you know, I don't know. It's a weird one. I didn't expect to, because I'm probably one of those grumpy proponents who've been like, games are super important. Don't make us compare to film. But, you know, yeah, it definitely had the impact on me.
And I think for Fede to put some of those elements from Isolation, you know, he's a big fan of Isolation. To put some of those elements into the movie, kind of immortalize them. You know, long after the last machine that can play Alien Isolation dies, the movies will still be playable, and those artifacts that we created in the studio in Horsham, in the UK, you know, will still be around, and you know, that's pretty amazing. And again, just a wonderful testament to the work of the team to have their work reflected back, and it's great for fans to see the thing that they really like up on the silver screen. Is, you know, wonderful. Those sets, the terminals, the save stations, obviously, the, you know, handles, think there's even a Mike Tanaka nod in poster. I think there's lots and lots of Easter eggs. It's a really wonderful nod to the work and to the game.
I feel like if we'd had the biggest impact we could, right, the thing that would have happened is someone would have gone to the save point and then got killed by an alien. And then you'd say like, oh yeah, wow, you know, I feel like that we could identify with whoever was on screen, because I sure know, like, playing it at the end of development, like that happening to me, it'd just be like, you know, you know, I'd like to see that reflected in the next one.
Despite this impact on the broader Alien franchise and the adoration it has received from fans around the world, the impact it's had on the games industry itself in defining a new era of AI-driven first-person horror has not been quite as substantial.
When I first played Isolation, and my first playthrough, I was reviewing it for PC Gamer, and so there was no discussion about it, you know, with anyone, because it was all journalists with review code under NDA. So it was just me in my own head playing this game and like just marveling at it and feeling like I had this feeling like I was witnessing like the birth of like a whole new age of horror games. Like, it felt like this is massive. Like, the way this creature behaves, the complete, you know, dynamism of its AI, and the way that the sheer heart pounding terror of this thing. I was like, this is it. This is like a new epoch for horror games. And then I was, over the next 10 years, as I was writing about the game and continuing to analyze it and break it apart, I was noticing that like no one else was trying it, or no one was trying to copy it, or even kind of getting close to matching the level of sophistication of the AI. And I found that quite strange, because I was convinced that there'd be a whole slew of like copycats of horror games doing an Alien Isolation, but in different settings or with different kind of creatures or whatever. But there was really nothing, and it felt like a real missed opportunity. Like, but you know, as someone not directly involved in game development, I was kind of, you know, I was wondering, maybe is it because it's too hard? Is it too expensive to do something like this? And I really couldn't understand, and I actually still really don't understand why no one tried to take that torch and continue doing games like that with that level of artificial intelligence. Like, it's kind of baffling that it didn't spawn a lot of imitators, and because there's a lot of stuff in Isolation that could be improved on, and I thought, you know, that's fair game for another developer to take what was great about it and then expand on it. But here we are a decade later and nothing touches it. It's quite strange.
While the industry hasn't shied away from first-person horror, not many have embraced the notion of having a singular intelligent threat that hunts you down by its own cunning. Many games work to remove or minimize the need for this approach courtesy of their design. While Capcom's Resident Evil franchise turned to first-person horror with its 7th and 8th main entries, Biohazard and Village, each with their own intimidating family of characters, the focus was more of a means to revisit the classic survival dynamics of the franchise akin to its roots on the Sony PlayStation back in 1996. Meanwhile, other games that have dabbled with this idea, such as Frictional's latest entry, Amnesia the Bunker from 2023, and Stormmine Games' A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead, do not approach it at the same scale and production level as Creative Assembly's efforts. As this retrospective began development in the summer of 2024, it felt like Alien Isolation would continue to fade into obscurity and become nothing more than a cult classic. At the time of release, the game sold just over 2 million copies in its first 6 months, which fell short of expectations. It was a significant investment, and as discussed, the studio grew substantially to take on the challenge of bringing the game to life. As such, the console team moved on to new ventures, with their next project being a collaboration with 343 Industries on the console-focused real-time strategy title Halo Wars 2, released on PC and Xbox One in 2017. And we even made a video about the AI of that game as well. And so it came as a surprise not just to myself, but many of my interviewees, that a sequel to Alien Isolation was in development. Announced on the 10-year anniversary of the game in 2024, a statement was released by the studio from none other than Al Hope, who continues on as creative director. When we started developing Alien Isolation, we had one guiding principle: to create a truly authentic experience that went back to the roots of the Alien franchise. A new story capturing the atmosphere and terror of the original 1979 movie masterpiece. It's been nothing short of incredible to witness your passion for the game over the years and see it reach so many players around the world. Your boundless enthusiasm, excitement, screams, and steely courage in the face of cinema's greatest killer have been profoundly rewarding. Whether you're a nightmare mode veteran or stepping into Amanda Ripley's shoes for that thrilling first attempt, good luck. We wanted to express our deep gratitude. It was a dream project brought to life by a brilliant team, and the reception you have given it over the years is extraordinary. On the 10th anniversary, it seems only fitting to let you know we have heard your distress calls loud and clear. Today I'm delighted to confirm on behalf of the team that a sequel to Alien Isolation is in early development. We look forward to sharing more details with you when we're ready. While our interview with Alan Simon came about courtesy of the studio itself, and was in fact recorded after this announcement, I wanted to keep this retrospective as a celebration of what the fans have known and loved for many years, rather than get caught up in speculation and hype. After all, our work on AI in games is about accuracy and delivering meaningful insight into the workings of game development. Besides, I have a sneaking suspicion this isn't the last time I'll be talking about Creative Assembly and their efforts in building the AI of the Perfect Organism.
I don't really remember that many weird and wonderful stories beyond the usual dev. I mean, the weird and wonderful stories really is every day. Right, I was meeting up with 8 people and we were in a darkened room. We'd turn all the lights down and we'd play the game. And, you know, every couple of weeks, someone would jump. And there is nothing more satisfying when you're trying to make something scary than seeing a grown man actually physically jump in his seat, and you're like, yeah, I'm definitely doing something right. When this grizzled veteran, you know, who's been doing this for years, we've sat in this room together for the last however long it is, and I've still made you jump. That's a lovely feeling. It's not a funny story, but that is a lovely feeling.
Has anybody told you the story about the Cheerios in space?
No.
Okay, right. There was a point at which it's actually after that bit where you get the hacking tool for the first time.
Right.
So you get the hacking tool, and you need to replace the decoder in it. So you go down that spiral staircase, and you can go down like 2 or 3 times, and there's corner windows that you can see out into space. I think they point actually towards they give you like a really nice view of either the planet or the station, like from the outside. But there's debris. Like whenever you look out of the windows, there's always like bits of debris that are like floating around. And it was an unfortunate accident that texture for the cereal container accidentally got applied to all this debris. So as you were walking down the staircase, you had massive space Cheerios floating past the windows like all the time.
You animating shoeboxes?
Oh yes, yeah, okay, yeah. Well, I should give credit to Ben Potts, like he was on the project as well, one of the other animators. But that's actually from the
Right at the start.
original, yeah, the original sort of like demo I was talking about. We did at the beginning, the kind of very quickly put together one. We had this room that was essentially by the end full of face huggers, and so we animated boxes that did look like shoe boxes, to just try and get an idea to telegraph the way they'd all move in the room, because there was so many of them. We need to figure out what path they were going to go in. So yeah, there was kind of a video knocking around of just this room with all these different coloured boxes, just just animating around the room. That was just it's a bit strange.
We set up for the early reviews. We set up a room and we had gaming chairs, and we'd got a really fancy setup for them. So they sat again in a completely darkened room, staring at a screen, surrounded by other journalists that they couldn't see, so that if the other journalists screamed, they would hear screams from within the room, all building up the atmosphere. And then this poor journalist came out and went to use the toilets, and the hand dryer was faulty. So they were sitting having a moment to themselves, and the hand dryer just would switch on for absolutely no reason. And they said after that experience, sitting there, knowing the door hasn't opened, knowing there's nobody in there with you, and then the hand dryer coming on, they said was probably the most scary experience of their entire life, thanks to what we'd set them up for.
the hiding place like vent post-it. So when you go into some of the hiding lockers, it says fix the vents. And that's not just an in-universe joke, that's an in-studio joke. Where Creative Assembly was previously, we had that architectural style that you had in buildings sometimes, where you didn't have roof tiles, you just had the heating vents, like those silver heating vents, just exposed along the ceiling because it was cool, like, you know, industrialization kind of thing. If it was during the winter, they would switch the heating on, and it was so loud that you could not talk to the person next to you. You literally couldn't talk to the person next to you. And it was some problem with the heating vents. And we kept sending emails to the people who owned the building, and we kept sending emails out to everybody, like, can someone please fix the fucking vents? It's really annoying. And so some enterprising environment artist put a post-it note in there that said fix the vents. And that was us complaining to the building people to fix the vents in the studio, not just the vents in the game.
So it was a difficult game to make if I hadn't got that message across. And there was a lot of soul searching. You know, are we doing the right thing? Should we just make a game where you can blast the alien and, you know, that'd be fun? And that's, you know, is that, you know, and I was adamant that this could work. This must be able to work. If we can grab the essence of that movie and put it into video game form, it will work. But it was we were getting to, you know, difficult times, and it wasn't 100% sure that it was going to work. And then the alien AI was as we intended in the build, but it was just falling flat. And so we gave ourselves the opportunity, but it was in this kind of white box, grey box environment. So we had an alien in this grey box environment. It's quite brightly lit, and it wasn't really working. And so we gave ourselves the chance to, okay, take a step back. Let's put in some display geometry. Let's put some lights in. Let's put some sound in. Let's put some VFX in. And we ran the same bit of code, the same AI on the alien. And it was absolutely fantastic because we were Simon might remember this. We were playing the same this build with all the components together in front of the team in broad daylight in the studio, and I was playing the game, and I could tell the alien was just about to catch me, and I turned around to look at the team as the alien got me, and everybody in the team just jumped in the air, and it was at that moment that I thought, that's it, that's we've done it, we can do it. That's the experience.
I'm not going to say it was an easy project to work on. It was a really hard project to work on. It was a really intense time. I would not have missed it for the world. I'm super proud of having worked on that game.
I mean, you know, lots of games have, you know, a long tail, right? But like, I've been lucky to work on a whole heap of really successful games that outsold Alien. You know, big budget things, great fun, entertain loads of people. That's why I've always done this, right? It was just want to entertain people. But nobody talks about anything I've ever worked on like they talk about Alien. You know, and it's like we talked about, you know, we talked about the book that Andy made. It's like no one's made a book about something I've done before. To be part of that, you're kind of like, wow, you've made a big impression on people. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is I'm most proud of the impression what it left people with, right? Because ultimately, like, I don't know about everybody else, but for sure for me, like, making games is about the impression, the entertainment, I don't know, the value you bring to someone else's life out of something that is, you know, a bit of fiction that takes away a moment for you of your day. I mean, that's a huge deal. And I kind of look at it as well and go, you know, last year I was out on a work trip, sat down in a restaurant, and my partner had come with me, and we were sat down in I can't remember what it was, Flatiron in Covent Garden, right? We sat there, and honestly, no word of a lie, someone sits down next to us at a table right to the side of us, and they started talking about Alien. And they were going on and on about it, like talking about how it behaved, how it was this amazing thing. At that point, 9 years after it had come out, my partner's like, are they talking about that game you made? I'm like, yeah. She's like, you want to tell them that you made it? I was like, no. But like that would be super embarrassing. But how crazy is this? Because I've worked on bigger games, but I've never sat down and someone started like just next to me, just talking about how amazing it is, you know, and that is more than any singular thing I got to do on the project. That I think is the thing I'm most proud of with it. The thing I took away the most as well. Because it's like reinforces like how awesome are video games, like that we get to have that impact on people's lives, from writing crazy code and rules to do different bits and pieces. It's just that's it. That to me is just total magic.
Oh, that's going to be the end of the video. I swear to God, like that whole story. Also, I just love the fact that hopefully someone is going to watch this video and be like, that guy we were sitting next to in the restaurant.